If you're a law student currently staring down a dense, multi-generational inheritance fact pattern and feeling, well, completely overwhelmed by all the moving parts, take a deep breath. You are absolutely in the right place. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to take those super confusing lists of heirs, fractions, and exceptions and transform them into your ultimate, structured mental cheat sheet for Islamic inheritance math, specifically focusing on Sunni sharers. We're going to decode the actual logic hidden inside these rules. That way, you're not just rotely memorizing them, you're really understanding them. All right, let's dive into this.
To keep things perfectly clear, we're grouping the sharers exactly by relationship category today. We'll start with general principles, move to spouses and parents, then ancestral shares, female agnatic rules, and finally wrap up with uterine siblings.
Okay, Part 1. General Principles of Sharers. Let's set the baseline.
Before we start applying any of the complex rules, we really need to establish our mathematical boundaries. You wouldn't build a house without a foundation, right? Well, cracking an inheritance fact pattern requires knowing exactly who is even playing the game. And that foundational number is 12. There are exactly 12 total shares in this entire system. The source notes break this down beautifully into precisely 4 male sharers and 8 female sharers. That is literally it. So if you ever feel lost in a total sea of relatives on a final exam, just ground yourself with this number. The whole fixed sharer system revolves around just these 12 specific individuals.
Now you might be wondering, what do these 12 folks actually get? Notice these 6 fractions here: 1/8, 1/6, 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, and 2/3. These are the strict Quranic fractions. When you're calculating fixed shares, these are the absolute only possible mathematical outcomes for our 12 individuals. If your initial fixed fraction calculation somehow spits out a 1/5 or a 1/7, stop right there because you've made a mistake. Keep these 6 fractions permanently locked in your mind.
But, the math isn't just static. This is where it gets really dynamic, and it brilliantly shows off the flexibility of the whole system. We need to define what a residuary is right off the bat. A residuary is a sharer whose fixed fraction actually drops, and instead they convert into taking whatever the remainder of the estate is once all the other fixed shares are paid out. As the notes point out, a father or a daughter can easily become residuaries under specific conditions. Understanding exactly when a fixed sharer transforms into a residuary is pretty much the ultimate key to solving the whole puzzle.
Let's move on to Section 2, Spouses and Parental Shares.
So we're zooming in on the most immediate family members now. This is where that beautiful, almost algorithmic if-then logic of the law truly kicks in. Looking at this matrix for spouses, the pattern is incredibly simple. The one condition that changes absolutely everything is the presence of a child, or a son's child, how low soever. If the answer is yes, there's a child, the husband gets 1/4 and the wife gets 1/8. But if the answer is no, their shares literally just double. The husband gets 1/2 and the wife gets 1/4. So the big takeaway here? The presence of descendants perfectly halves the spouse's share. All right, what about the parents? Both the mother and father start with a baseline of 1/6 if a child is present. But if there is no child, look at what happens. The mother's share jumps to 1/3 and the father completely converts into a residuary. And you definitely want to note these special conditions for the exam. If there's only a daughter, the father gets his 1/6 plus he acts as a residuary. That's a double win for him. And finally, watch out for this massive trap regarding the mother. If a spouse and the father are present, her share dynamically shifts to 1/3 of the rest of the estate after the spouse takes their cut, not 1/3 of the total. Let's step outward on the family tree to Section 3, Ancestral Shares and Exclusions. To resolve any ancestral claims, you're going to run this 3-step hierarchy test derived directly from the source notes. Step 1 is the equal level rule. If you have maternal and paternal grandmothers sitting at the exact same level, you just treat them equally. Step 2 is the proximity rule. The nearer relative absolutely 100% excludes the remoter one. And Step 3 is the intermediate link rule. Whoever connects an heir to the deceased can actually exclude that heir. So for example, a living mother will exclude a mother's mother. Simple enough, right? Well, here is where it gets wild, and it's a huge trap for law students. Write this down and highlight it. An excluded heir can still legally exclude other heirs. It sounds like a paradox, but the source notes give a fantastic example. A father legally excludes his own mother, the paternal grandmother. But even while she's excluded and getting nothing, she still legally blocks the maternal great-grandmother. Because she is nearer in proximity, she excludes the remoter relative, even though she herself gets 0. It's this fascinating, invisible domino effect.
Okay,
Moving right along to Section 4, Female Agnatic Sharer Rules.
Grab a coffee, because we are diving into the absolute densest part of the legal forest here. Let's start with a crucial question to test your instincts. What happens to a daughter's fixed share, which normally would be a solid 1/2 if she's single, or 2/3 collectively for multiple daughters, if a son is suddenly introduced into the fact pattern? Any guesses? The answer is that the presence of that male equivalent instantly destroys her fixed fraction. Boom, gone. She, along with the son, converts entirely into a residuary.
Under this specific category, we've got 4 female agnatic sharers to analyze: daughter, son's daughter, full sister, and consanguine sister. On an exam, you absolutely must analyze them sequentially, exactly in this downward order, from direct descendants down to siblings. The higher-up descendants fundamentally dictate what the lower ones receive. It's a strict hierarchy.
Notice how the exclusions cascade right here. If there's a single higher daughter, she confidently takes her 1/2, and because she only took a half, that thankfully leaves some room for the son's daughter, who gets squeezed into a 1/6 share. However, if there was a son present, or say multiple higher daughters taking their collective 2/3, the lower descendants, like the son's daughter, they'd be completely 100% excluded from the fixed shares.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the coolest but most complex mechanics in the whole system, the pulling in rule. Look at this family setup. We have a higher daughter taking her 1/2. Below her, we have a daughter of a son and a son of a son. The lower female daughter actually gets pulled in by the male at her exact same level. Instead of taking her tiny fixed fraction, they become residuaries together, and they split whatever is left in a strict 1-to-2 female-to-male ratio. So she takes one portion, and the male takes 2 portions of that remainder.
Let's hit our final stretch. Section 5, Uterine Siblings and Conclusion.
Now, uterine siblings, meaning they share a mother but have different fathers, are a really unique branch. When we look at them, a lot of the normal rules get turned entirely upside down. Notice how, for almost all other sharers we talked about, the male gets double the female's share, just like we saw with that 1-to-2 ratio a second ago. But for uterine siblings, there is no doubling rule, none. Males and females share totally equally. Why? The notes explain that they are newly created Quranic sharers. If there is one uterine sibling, they get 1/6. If there are 2 or more, they share 1/3 collectively, split entirely evenly regardless of gender.
Okay, before we completely wrap up, we have to solve the overarching mathematical problem of the day. What on earth happens when you do all this fraction math and the estate doesn't add up to a perfect whole? Enter the doctrine of Rad, also known as the doctrine of return. As defined in the notes, if there are no residuaries or distant kindred, and there's property just sitting there left over, that remaining fraction naturally returns to the existing sharers proportionally. It's an elegant fix. The doctrine basically ensures that the family members take the full property, rather than it remaining unallocated.
I really want to leave you with this provocative thought as you study. Think back to that exam trap we covered, an excluded grandmother who gets absolutely nothing, yet still structurally blocks a completely different grandmother from inheriting. If an excluded heir still holds that much structural power, what does this tell us about the elegance of Islamic inheritance law? To me, it tells us that this isn't just some arbitrary list of fractions you have to memorize. It's a deeply logical, mathematically balanced, and highly interlocking system designed to preserve specific family structures at all costs. Master the logic of these relationships, and I promise you, you will master the exam. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy studying.